Hello and welcome to this episode of Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. So this episode have some personal I'm sharing personal thoughts and feelings and views because after all it's stories that shape us and some of the stories that shape me. I've been talking for the last 2 weeks around abuse and how it's dealt with in the church and some of the ways the Bible has been used to manipulate and to control, and really the meaning that I've come to find in it and what does that mean. A lot of people was did a lot of deconstructing work or unpacking, I'm going to say, of their faith, and it looks different for different people. uh, when I did it, it was, I call it living on the edge, because I felt like I was on the edge because what I had no longer was okay for me. I needed more, and it wasn't reflected. And so lots of questions I asked of myself to, and through prayer and through fasting, to ask questions that gave me meaning so that I could give my children meaning and I could give them honest answers and give people honest answers that was also seeking. Sometimes we're afraid to do that because we're afraid of what we might come up against. We're afraid of what we might find. And because we're afraid, we don't do it. But it's still there beneath the surface. It's causing havoc still. So my policies is best to know. It's best to do the work to know. So this episode is called How to Heal Religious Trauma and Not Lose Your Faith. And of course, if you've ever done any kind of healing work, it's ongoing. There's always sometimes things that is going to come that you'll have to figure out, that you'll have to understand, that you'll have to learn some more about. For context, I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Um, Served my mother's God for a long, long time until I had to get to know him for myself, which I did, and I fell in love, and I've stayed in love. And I know people different. I have different people around me. Some believe, some no longer believe. Some is on the edge, some's not so much on the edge. I have different people around me. I'm fine with anybody. I know where I am, and I'm absolutely decided, and I'm fine for other people to be absolutely decided in where they are, and I don't need to convince anybody otherwise. I live, I try to live as authentic as I can. And I know people are trying to do the same thing, and we're just on different paths, different places, but we can coexist. So how do we heal from religious trauma? And I'm speaking to this because I know as we end the series on abuse, I know there are a lot of people who experience abuse, whose spiritual abuse was also a part of it. And so some people have left the faith, left Christianity, left God, don't want to know, because of the hurt that they sustained when the words that were supposed to be life-giving was used to harm. We have a lot to take responsibility for, a lot. And so we need to acknowledge that something happened, that the religion caused a lot of pain and a lot of harm. Now I can't fix it. It's not my job to fix. What I can do is be responsible in how I live and the things that I do. So if you want to heal from religious trauma, what are some things that you can do? Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm only going to mention 3 things that you can do. There's so many more things as you begin to unpack. You might need to find a safe space to do the unpacking in. So first is acknowledge the rupture. When we're healing from any kind of trauma, whether it's the mother wound, we need to acknowledge that there's a disconnect between us and our mothers, and we have insecure attachment. Whether it's father-daughter relationship or sexual trauma, or whatever kind of trauma we're healing from, we have to first come to a place of acknowledgement that what happened to us hurt us. So it's the same thing with religious trauma. We have to acknowledge that there was a rupture, acknowledge that there was a rupture, that there was a hurt. One of the things that I was afraid to do is to allow things to come to the surface that I feel would challenge the Christianity, the view that I was given of what Christianity is. I was given a very white, Eurocentric view of it, how to dress, what dress was modest, what was appropriate, and all of that. And as a Black woman, I never saw myself reflected in scriptures. Now, here's the thing. I didn't think I should. And that's the thing. I never challenged it, never thought about it, kind of always let it stay beneath the surface, never allowed myself to read the books or have the conversation. I never thought I should do that. I never wondered. But I never wondered And some of us, I'm going to think, no wonder some of us rather view God as distant and as uncaring, because we can't relate to him. One of the things that's funny for me is here in the Bible in Patois. So in Jamaica, we speak English, but there's a dialect. And so here in the Bible, in the way that people speak, is just such a beautiful thing to do, to hear. And hearing the different the nuances in culture and how we understand and live out our faith is also beautiful. So it's not, it's if you're thinking it's not Eurocentric, think about this. How do you feel when you see an image of Jesus that is not long flowing hair and blue eyes? It's almost blasphemous to see any other image of him, because that's the one we were told that it looks like. Now we know different, right? So there's power. If you're for example in a presentation, in a seminar, what kind of PowerPoint slides, who is reflected on the images in the slides? When I was growing up, it's just one, all the Bible stories, none of them ever looked like me. And all the people going up to heaven didn't look like me either. I did used to wonder about that. Like they all look a certain way and I wasn't in it. Right. So all of this for me, all of this unpacking is acknowledging that that did some damage. So that's why it can be, it can be, it can make God out of reach, and it feels oppressive. And that's why it's important to know for yourself why you believe what you believe, and being able to see God and to hear him in your context. So number one is finding and acknowledge the wound. And number two is finding a safe space to talk about it honestly, a space that affords you the opportunity to say, yeah, this is where I am, this is what I'm feeling, this is how it feels for me, this is what's going on. A safe space to do that. Now, not many Christians can provide that safe space, because we're still so very defensive and defended, and we want to defend the view that we were given, and we don't have room for people to think through and talk through what we got. When we are, I am from the Caribbean, where our descendants are slaves that were taken from their home, oppressed, killed, lots of stuff happened. And we know that lots of people were Christians who do these things. There's a lot to answer for. We know that. I know that. I can separate God from them, because he didn't do it. They did. Man did. But we still have to acknowledge and find safe spaces to talk about what that was like, and what's that like for us, and the legacy that we have and have to deal with and have to talk through and heal from as a result. And it became really clear to me when I know that God don't have a problem with that unpacking, that he can sit through it. He will sit with us. He'll hold our hand. He'll help us ask the questions and come to a place of understanding. Also, number three is don't judge yourself for your questions. Don't feel bad that you have questions that you need answering. In 2020, when I wrote Living on the Edge, it's because I was on the edge, but there was no safe space to go talk about living on the edge. And so the pandemic in that sense was almost a blessing, because I didn't have to go in the building to church. I had the space to do the process. I had a year and nearly two to do the process that I was on, to do it safely, to not feel under pressure. It's my husband that did all the listening, and my lines that I was drawing, and the decisions that I'd come to as a result of understanding. Now that was my journey. Yours might be very different. The ruptures for you, the religious trauma for you might have more depth than mine. It might mean something else to you. You might have made some decisions around it already, but it's really important to understand it, to unpack it, to find safe spaces to talk through it, and to not judge yourself because you have questions and you need answers. If you're a parent listening, it's important that you can answer questions for your children, that they can come to you for a place of understanding. We were using a curriculum, and we got to this place, it's character building curriculum. And I generally, I like this curriculum, but it was talking about Columbus being a good man. And we couldn't get past that, because we know that that's not true. We know that isn't true, right? So you might feel different, some of you listening to this, but when you, When you read the history of the Caribbean and what happened, we can't put him in the same category. Maybe he changed and you know something that I don't know. But we have to have these conversations and be prepared to have these conversations with our children, to be honest with them, because otherwise, we will manipulate them into believing something that they know there's something going on in their body. They know that that's not true, and they're not wanting to be forced to believe something that isn't true. But when we don't have to be afraid, we don't have to be afraid to do the unpacking, do the questions, ask the questions, pray through it, sit with it, because God's wisdom have depth, and he will give us what we need. So we don't have to manipulate anybody. We don't have to control anybody. We don't have to shut it down. We don't have to pretend that it doesn't exist. We can be with it and ask for guidance to go through it, to understand it, to come to a place of resolution where we are at peace. There's so much more I could say about this conversation, and maybe this conversation need to carry on as we talk about religious trauma. And I just thought of the woman who said to me, Joanna, you have to talk about spiritual abuse years ago. And maybe that's where we go next. I never have a kind of like a set place of where Stories That Shape Us is going to go, the things that I'm going to talk about, maybe the things that the places that you might be that you need to reflect on. But I do know that when people are healing, sometimes spiritual trauma is a layer that needs to be healed. Whether we're healing from domestic abuse, sexual abuse, or whatever it is that we're healing, sometimes that layer needs to be uncovered. And so maybe that's where I'll go next. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story. Take care.